Hi, and welcome to the Research Room, a space to make research by the people for the people.
Perfect synergy.
And today we're going to be talking about habits. So, it comes to no surprise that we are in 2022 now. It is a new year, and this is usually the time that people want to think about changing themselves. And even if it's not changing themselves, maybe it's like keeping themselves the same. Maybe it's about loving themselves a bit more. Maybe it's about just wanting to be happy, right? So all these things I think kind of come down to this idea of habits. How do we create these habits? How do we maintain these habits? How might you break some habits that are making you unhappy? So I'm going to be talking about that today, just kind of generally. And to do that, I'm going to go over some myths or misconceptions at the very least of what it means to have a habit, what it means to break that habit and change it. So I'm going to be talking about that today. I'll go through a few different concepts here, and then I'll talk about what works as well. So not just the myths that are tied to habits. So I want to start with something that someone very famous said, and this famous person is called Dwayne the Rock Johnson, and he has these four concepts here that kind of just deal with this idea of willpower. And I'm going to pose them as questions to you to see if you think that these are actually tied to the idea of making habits. So I'm going to ask, is it about drive? Is it about power? Do you stay hungry? Do you devour? And these are all things, again, that The Rock has said, Dwayne Johnson. And I'm going to have to say, no, it doesn't have to do with these things, at least not as much as one might think. So the idea of drive, and maybe this ties the idea of motivation. Motivation, of course, is important, but it's not nearly enough to get you to the end goal. There's this idea of chasing power. And power, I guess, could be a motivation in itself, but again, not enough, right? The idea of power. You could stay hungry, and this could potentially help some things, I guess, but I don't like this idea that you stay hungry, because then what's ever good enough, right? If you're just always staying hungry, this idea that you can't just be happy with where you are, and it's not to say that you are complacent, but it is to say that you can accept and acknowledge where you are, that you can be fulfilled and be whole as you are, but still want change, right? You don't have to just stay hungry. You can acknowledge oh, I've made progress, yeah, and then you don't have to follow that up by saying oh, I've made progress, but it's not enough progress. That eventually it gets old, right? Maybe that might work for a little bit. Maybe it works for enough time to push through something. But if you really want to form a habit, something that lasts a long time, then this whole idea of staying hungry doesn't quite get you there. And then there's the idea of devouring. And so this is kind of this idea that you go all in. It's really going in head first, and you keep going in head first. And so this also isn't going to get you there. If you only go at 100% all the time, if you're devouring and devouring and devouring, you're not going to build a habit that way. You are just going to burn out. And again, maybe this gets you through a short term kind of thing. Maybe that's a week, maybe that's 2 weeks. But for a habit, something that you want to do for 3 months, a year, a decade, the rest of your life, if you're constantly devouring, I think you can understand that that's not going to help you build that habit. So I'm going to have to say not quite, as far as what Dwayne Johnson is saying. There's other important concepts here, though. this concept of laziness. I think that's something that plagues a lot of people, unfortunately. We think of ourselves as lazy, maybe we think of others as lazy, maybe other people have told you that you're lazy. I'm here to say, no, you're not lazy. We all have things that we want to do. We all have things that we don't want to do, right? The things that you want to do, you probably look like you are just the most motivated and like willing and like thoughtful person when it comes to those things. But then there's other things that like you just don't care about and you don't want to like put in energy or effort into those things. And that's totally fine. You don't have to be that person, right? Unless you want to. And if you want to make changes in that direction, then it might just come down to this idea of motivation to like help change and reframe that perspective that you have on whatever that activity is. Um, so laziness in itself, I would say, is not something that is tied to this idea. Like, so motivation, I'm going to say a lot about motivation in a bit, but motivation is like one side of the coin. Laziness is the other side of the coin. They're both kind of the same thing. And just how like motivation doesn't get you to an end goal, like motivation is not nearly enough to make a habit. Laziness is not the thing that's stopping you from that habit as well. So keep that in mind. Then this idea of self-control. Self-control is also like, I think intuitively it makes a lot of sense that like, yeah, someone who has like these good habits that you might look up to, like they must just have so much self-control. But like time and time again, research shows that it's not really about self-control. There's so many times that they try to see if self-control actually relates to someone that's trying to build a habit. And the people that end up building the habits are not the people that have the most self-control. Everyone has self-control, right? And I think everyone also loses self-control. It doesn't matter how good you come across as like this person who's like so able to do whatever they want and not like lead into temptation or whatever. But that's just also not the case. Like we all have breaking points when it comes to self-control. And so I think that we have to also like get rid of this idea that like self-control is good and no self-control is not good, right? Like it's not the case when it comes to habits. And when you think about like these good habits that you might want to try to do, whatever those good habits are for you, it's a very subjective thing. Whatever you think is going to be happy for you, make happiness for yourself. Self-control is not the thing that gets you there. Everyone's self-control wears thin, as I said. And honestly, it's the people that have habits that look like they have a lot of self-control. It's just because it's so ingrained in their system at that point that they're not looking at the temptations anymore. If they came across the same temptations over and over and over again, I mean, that habit would probably break eventually. And I mean, that person that you thought had a lot of self-control will look like a normal person again. So it's not quite this idea of self-control either. So then when it comes to building habits, there's also the idea of like maybe if I just remind myself enough, maybe if I put post-it notes everywhere, maybe if my phone is like alerting me about things, like maybe that's going to help me get into the habit here. And I'll say like, yes, there might be a little bit of truth to that. Maybe that helps you, especially when it's like brand new, right? That like you just need a little bit of a nudge to like know like, oh, hey, I'm supposed to be doing something right now, whatever that thing is. Maybe I need to be changing my thoughts right now. Maybe I need to be feeling something. Maybe I need to be behaving in a certain way, whatever it is. Reminders might help with that very, very initial like kind of stage. If you're not aware of something, then how can you do it, right? But reminders, for the most part, kind of get in the way. And there's two different reasons for that. One reason is because we can, of course, over rely on them. If you have reminders every single day for every single thing that you did, right? Once those reminders go away, you're going to forget. You're not going to do those things anymore. There might be a few things that stick, but like on the whole, it's not reminders that are going to get you there. Like there has to be something within yourself that's like really saying like, hey, like, oh, this is what I need to be doing right now, rather than this external thing that comes in to tell you, oh, do this now. So that's one thing that like it becomes this like this aid that like gets in the way of like you actually like internalizing and processing what you need to be doing. There's no actual like logic other than, oh, I'm being told so I'm doing it. If you're not being told, then don't do it. That's not a habit. So then there is this idea of, or the second reason for why reminders don't quite work, and actually potentially could get in the way of you building a habit, is that every time you're reminded of something, every time your phone like pings or whatever, right? If you get that message and you're doing something else, then you have to like think like, oh, do I actually want to stop what I'm doing and do this other thing? And that's going to be a very much like this interference of the like this conflict of these two things. um, and probably the thing that you were doing is going to be like more fun, or like it's going to be something that you chose to do, right, rather than like something you have to do now. So then you might start to like rationalize in your own head like, oh, like I don't need to do this now actually, and I'll put it off. But then you forget because like you don't have another reminder, and then you it's tomorrow and you haven't done the thing, and then that whole cycle kind of keeps happening, right? So um, every time you get a reminder, you have to now think consciously, like, oh, am I going to do this or not? And so habits are not this conscious thing, right? Like they just kind of happen. Um, they're this subconscious thing that happens. They get ingrained into our bodies. They get ingrained into our memories. And so you don't have to really think about it. It's not like this intentional thing after a certain point that like you're just doing this thing. You're just doing it because this is what you know at this point. And so if you have to be reminded about it, you might have to second guess, well, like, is this actually what I want to be doing? Okay, so then there's the idea of motivation, which I briefly mentioned before, is like it's not going to be the thing that actually gets you to the habit, but I think it's something that helps at least enough. So when it comes to motivation, the idea of rewards is very much tied to that as well. And so there's two different types of like rewards that you can think about. There are external rewards, there are internal rewards. These also get divvied up into saying extrinsic motivation versus intrinsic motivation. And so if you have extrinsic motivation, that is something that is outside of yourself, that is trying to get you to do something, right? So like if I go for a run today, that means tomorrow I can go see my friends. If I go for a run, I can eat that piece of chocolate. If I go for a run, I get $5. Whatever that reward system is, that is something external to yourself. And I think again, like this might help you get started, right? Like you really don't want to do this thing, like that a push to go ahead and do this, like, oh, like, okay, I really want this money, or I really want this chocolate right now. Like, great. Like maybe it does actually like help you do whatever that thing is. But even like in saying it, like I feel a little like that it can't be healthy, right? Like that you're only doing it for like these things. And like again, like is that really going to be a habit that you end up forming? Or does it just become this thing that like you kind of like regret, or like start to like despise? I'm like, oh, like I don't want to even do this thing anymore. And you just go for the chocolate, you just get that money, whatever. Or you hang out with your friends or whatever it is, right? So um, the idea that there are these extrinsic rewards, like maybe just for a little bit, and eventually like you have to like pair it off. Like you can't just like continually do it if you want to form that habit. Once that motivator goes away, once that reward goes away, you're probably going to drop whatever behavior, whatever you're doing, because you just don't want to do it, right? You only did it because of the outcome. So then there are intrinsic rewards. And so when it comes to intrinsic rewards, I think this is like a little bit closer to like what we want to be doing. Intrinsic just means that it's something within yourself that is rewarding or motivating. So maybe honestly just makes you feel good, right? Like maybe you feel like physically like, oh, like I like this, whatever this thing is. Maybe you're asking yourself like, oh, like I wish I was doing this thing, like I just never made time for this anymore. I want to make time for this. And so that's something a bit more like intrinsic to yourself, that like I want to be doing this, like I like doing this, and so I'm going to make time to do this as well. Maybe it's something that like just gives you peace of mind. Maybe that peace of mind is something that like you've been yearning for, right? Like you've just been so like busy or hectic, you're like swept from one thing to another, and it's like, okay, like for myself, I need something to like calm me down a little bit. And so that's an intrinsic motivator. You have your own internal like logic and reason for why you want to do something, rather than I'm going to get something outside of me to do this. And so these are intrinsic motivators. They tend to be good. They tend to be the things that get you into that habit. You keep pushing yourself enough to get there. And I think you can also like help reason in a more healthy kind of fashion that like, okay, yes, I want this, but I don't have to like continually push through when I don't have the energy, or like when I'm just kind of feeling like I don't want to do this right now. Like you can reason with yourself a little bit better, and be like, okay, like it's okay that like I'm not doing this every single day. But more times than not, you probably will do it because like again, there's something in you that like wants you to do this. So that's like one of the things that actually like can help form these habits or help change habits. And I guess, I mean, really, so far I've really just been saying like, oh, like don't do this, don't do that. Like these are all misconceptions when it comes to building habits. But I do want to focus now on like what does work. So yes, there's a little bit of the intrinsic motivation, but beyond that, I think one of the biggest things that comes up time and time again is that the idea of environment, that our environments need to be um, I guess they have to be set up in a way that it's easy to do whatever we want to do. Because if it's not, if you have to already do something you don't want to do, and it's hard to do it, like good luck doing that, right? Like you're probably not going to do that. No one is, right? Like that's not a you thing. I'm not saying judgmentally about you. I'm just saying like that's humans, right? Like humans are not going to push through, with rare exception. And again, if they are pushing through that much, like they're probably going to also burn out by the end of it. So make it easier. Do something with your environment to make sure that you are able to do whatever it is. This to me also ties to this idea of just like of structural like kind of like barriers to different actions that people want to do, right? Like of course people want to like eat healthily and like feel good and like be physically active, or like be good members of whatever, right? Like of course people want to do that, but like if your environment is not set up that way, if society has not quite set it up that way, then it makes it much harder. It doesn't matter how much intention you have to like do these things. If you just can't, like literally can't, like you're not going to, you're going to give up that at some point. So there's that idea that your environments have to be shaped in such a way. And so there's a couple different things that go on with this. There's like really big changes that you can do, or there's smaller changes. Bigger changes would just include something like moving, like literally moving. And once you move, like you at least have that like fresh start, because the way that like habits are working, right, is that like you're so used to like being in a certain location, being in at a certain time, and you're doing something like it's so ingrained into your memory again that like you do it. If you're now in a different location, it doesn't matter, right? You could be doing anything, literally anything in that moment. And so you might have like some tendencies, sure, but like the actual habit doesn't stay in the same kind of way. And you can now like change. It's that idea again that like you're thinking about this. It's that reminder, like, oh, like usually at this time I'm doing something, but like, do I actually want to be doing that? Is this actually how I want to be spending my time? Is this the behavior I want to be engaging in? And so you might be able to make a different habit in that case, if you do something drastic like move. Other things would be like if your whole life kind of changes for whatever other reason. So like that could be like a really big like professional like kind of shift. Maybe that is something about like, I mean, if you have like a kid, if you have a baby, that's going to change a lot of your old routines and your old habits, whether you wanted to or not. It's going to, right? You have to now work around these other circumstances. And so you start to like disentangle the things that you used to do at certain times during the day. So those are like drastic things. I'm not really expecting you to like do those drastic things, but I'm just saying that's the idea behind it. Something you can do though is you can make small changes in your environment to make this easier. So let's say it's something simple as like you want to change your coffee drinking habit. Let's say you drank too many cups of coffee throughout the day, and you want to change that to something like tea. So instead of having your coffee maker there every single day, you get to stare at it. You come right down from your bed to the kitchen, you see it. Instead of like looking at that and being like, okay, it's easy to make this coffee. Like, I'm just going to do this. This is my routine at this point. If you exchange that with maybe a hot water like heater, and like maybe the night before you have to like take a tea bag out, and like it's all there and it's set up for you, that next day you're probably not going to like go find your coffee maker. You're going to just like have that tea, because you have that intention already. You have the motivation to change that, and now your environment is shaped in such a way that it's easy to do that, rather than you have the intention but like, oh, my environment, like it's not allowing me to do that. So having that environmental kind of component, like, again, it's not so much about like the motivation. Yes, that's important. Yes, the intention behind it is important, but the thing that like actually gets you there is your environment is set up to do so. So yeah, such a simple thing. Something as simple as like maybe you put a bowl of like fruits out and you start eating fruits because like it's there, it's readily available, as opposed to like some other food that might be readily available. But make it like harder to like get to those, and make it a lot easier to get to the other fruits or other foods that you want to be eating. So yeah, that's the basic thing that works, and the thing that like I would say most research on this idea of habits is like leaning toward. Um, of course, there's the components, like I said, the motivation, the other intention behind it. But that's again, it's just not going to get you there enough compared to something like these environmental kind of shifts. Also, like with environmental shifts, like you can start to like think of yourself in a slightly different way. Like if your environment is nice and neat all the time, then you think like, oh, like maybe I am this like neat person, as opposed to like it's not that neat of an environment. You might start to think of yourself as like, oh, like I'm just kind of like a messy like person. Either way, like that's fine, but like, is that what you want to be? If you don't want to be that person, then do something to change it. And building habits is one of those ways to do that. So if you do want to change something about yourselves, which is completely fine, like we're allowed to grow and like have progress in our lives, and even if it's not considered progress, like at least it's something different that you want to try, like you're allowed to do that, right? And so the best way to do that is to like build these habits, and I mean, it takes time, and it's not going to happen something that, like overnight or whatever, right? And so we really want to like do something for ourselves, that's going to be something that makes us happy and healthy, and whether that's mentally, physically, whatever. And so we can do these things, and we can actually start to make it just part of our lives, and make it a lot easier to do that, rather than a struggle every single day that you're fighting with yourself, you're fighting with your environment. So I'll just quickly recap that when it comes to building habits, it's not necessarily about willpower. It's not necessarily about laziness or self-control either. It's also not necessarily about reminders or rewards, but rather it's something more about the environment. And so I guess with that, this whole month, I'll be talking about habits. I'm going to continue this conversation. I'll start to apply it to different parts of our lives, and see how it's working, how it's not working, what we should be questioning about this research as well. And so you can find all of this on roomforresearch.com. And you can also find it on social media at Room for Research. And so with that, I hope that this year brings you a lot of happiness, whether that means you're changing something or not. Maybe just like be mindful of where you are. And that in itself, I think is a win. Yeah, so until next time, bye.
With the sun will breeze.